Okay, let's
Okay.
get started.
Yes. So my section was on monotheism, philosophy, sophists, and Socrates.
All right.
So kind of a wide range of topics.
Yes.
So Ferguson kind of began with the idea that there almost developed an idea, some form of monotheism in Greek religion, not exactly monotheism as we would view it in the Judeo-Christian aspect, but he said that the idea or the reality of a monarchical government that kind of developed kind of led to the understanding of, okay, if there's one Lord on earth that rules and reigns, then maybe there's this idea of one supreme Lord or being that rules over the heavens as well. So, but the idea of monotheism was more of an encompassing idea. So basically, one God encompasses all the other gods, and kind of an abstract philosophical principle, not the idea that we have that there is only one God. It's more of there is one God or one being or one philosophy that encompasses all other gods and philosophies. So the closest realization of monotheism in the Greek world was the elevation of the sun god to the supreme position among the gods. So basically they viewed the sun god as chief god and then everything else kind of coming under the sun god. So
Yeah, that's sometimes called henotheism.
henotheism. Okay. Awesome. All right. Next we have Hellenistic and Roman philosophies. So in the Hellenistic Roman world, philosophy was actually seen as a religion. So it wasn't just an area of study, but it actually kind of became religion. For the educated was kind of the main people that interacted with philosophy. So each school of philosophy, they had their own distinct beliefs and practices. And those beliefs and practices, they actually provided moral and spiritual direction. So it wasn't just philosophy to stretch your brain and to kind of understand logically, but it actually provided the moral and spiritual direction, guidelines, rules, principles for how to live your life. So poets and philosophers were actually seen as ethical guides for their society. So where in our context we kind of look more towards pastors, priests, religious people as the ethical guides, in this society philosophers were actually seen as ethical guides. Ethics was the chief concern of philosophy, and there were three modes of moral exhortation. So philosophers would give exhortations to people, almost we could view them as sermons, but obviously in a different manner. So I'm going to struggle with pronouncing these. The first one is protrapsis. Yeah. So basically, that was an invitation to follow a philosophical life, kind of like an altar call, as we would say. So just calling the masses to engage with philosophy. Then there was paraenesis, and that was a call to a course of action or to abstain from an action. So they would invite you to engage with philosophy, and then they would say, okay, now that you have this realization, you need to abstain from doing this, or we want you to start engaging in this type of activity. And then there was diatribe, which were just basically moral discussions aimed at moving people to ethical action. So those are kind of three modes of moral exhortation, and the chief thing I got from this section was basically that philosophy was religious in a sense and provided moral compass. So now we're going to talk about popular philosophy. So in the Hellenistic Roman age, philosophy, it started kind of more with the intellectual and the educated, but it started moving to kind of include the common man, the everyday person, into practice of philosophy. And the key thing is it wanted to teach people how to live. And so it wasn't just something that was in the brain. It actually kind of came down and broke down teaching. It had to be teachable. People had to be able to, the common man, to hear philosophy, and that would provide guidelines for how to live their life every day. So a virtuous life in Hellenistic Roman philosophy, it included self-sufficiency, so not relying on other people, actually included freedom, and it included happiness. So if you were to seek a virtuous life, those were three of the kind of overarching principles which were included there. And then later philosophers, they kind of broke from the city-state mindset. So in the world of ancient Greece, there were these city-states, which you all know, that were kind of very codependent, or the people within the city-state was very codependent. They were basically one community, but they kind of broke from that mindset and kind of promoted more of an individualistic understanding of reality. So basically, like, each person needs to be self-sufficient. They're not just in one community where everyone's taking care of each other. So that's something that Ferguson talked about. Moving on, we're going to talk about sophists. They were teachers of the art of public speaking and persuasion. So that was actually kind of a position, something that people were fully employed by, like, patrons to be public speakers and persuasion. It was a big part of Greco-Roman society that in government and politics and business, they would bring in someone that could persuade kind of the crowd. But as the Greeks kind of experienced other cultures, as they expanded their empire and they started engaging with people around the world, they became more open to moral relativity. So they kind of realized that, okay, we have all these principles that we live by, but then we go to other cultures and we realize they have other principles that are also true and that also work there. So they recognized that their customs were no longer just a matter of universal validity, but other truths existed. So this group, they began to even question the existence of the gods, maybe not going as far as declaring them not true, but kind of just began to question, began to think about these things, and they relied heavily on rationalism rather than just religious experience. And they basically raised the questions, they asked the tough questions, which set the background and the backdrop for the philosophical schools that would come on their kind of coattails. So there we go. And then the last section that Ferguson touched on was Socrates. He was, or before Socrates came on the scene, most philosophers were natural philosophers. So they were focused on issues of the natural universe, physical science, the heavens, matter. That was kind of their realm that they really focused on. But he kind of turns the tables and he begins to focus on more the practical issues of daily life. So not just focusing on the physical universe, but okay, how does what we understand in our mind affect how we should live? So he also, like we touched on before, focused on individualism. That kind of came from the works of Socrates. So humans were the focus of his philosophy, not necessarily the physical universe, but humans, and not just a philosophical principle, but real people.
Ethics. Ethics was his main concern.
Ethics, okay.
How you should live, how
Right.
a person should live.
Right, yeah. So he called on people to focus not only on their physical bodies, but also on their souls. So kind of looking deeper beyond just the outside, but looking about what makes people who they are. And then he had this kind of principle that wrongdoing was based in wrong thinking or wrong information. So kind of if you act out, it's not necessarily because more the issue behind why you acted out or why you did something wrong is because your worldview, your understanding of society, of practice was you had misinformation, and then that's why you committed a wrong act. And Socrates was actually accused by people in his day of not worshiping the gods and corrupting the youth. A lot of people in his society didn't recognize his importance. They thought a lot of the questions he was asking, a lot of his philosophy was disrupting to society, and it was kind of later on that people really recognized the brilliance of some of his work. So that is my presentation.
Okay. Any questions or comments? All right.
All right.
Yeah, Socrates Mark got into trouble because he questioned everybody. That was his Socratic method that we talk about. And often that made people uncomfortable because people don't like to be questioned. Well, and also he made them, he would keep questioning them until they had to admit they didn't know something. Because basically he said, until you admit you don't know, you can't come to know anything new, right? So anyway, interesting. All right, next, Lane will share with us.
So I read Ferguson's section on the book of Greek mysteries and Eastern religions, except the one dealing with Mithras, because I believe Adrian did that.
Yes.
So, mystery comes from this Greek word mysterion, which means...
Seriously? Mysterion?
Yeah, really.
It sounds like the name of a bad superhero.
Okay, I'd like to get on with my presentation. So it comes from the Greek mysterion and a few other Greek words. One of them was like maeo, but I think mysterion is the more important of these because it's from a term meaning ceremonial dance. But the mystery of these cults wasn't necessarily always some big secrecy or some big hidden thing. It was more you couldn't really have a spiritual relationship unless you were initiated into the cult. So it was more of a focus on the feeling, the mystery of the religious experience, more than being in the secret group. Although being in a secret cult was a big part of it. A lot of people enjoyed that. So, one of the more sort of open mystery cults was these local mystery cults. And typically they were agrarian. They dealt with farm life. The deities for these mystery religions were described as sort of a little bit vague, but they were known to be associated with the great Kabiri gods. And something really interesting about these was that initiation into this cult, although not much is known about it, involved the confession of sins. And though that's a little bit common in Roman religion and culture later, it's not common in Greek culture. So it's kind of like a precursor that's a little interesting. But other than the confession of sins, there's evidence of ritual dance and sacrifice and feasts. And something important mentioned in these feasts is that while you're engaging in them, it is believed that the gods themselves come down and share in the feast with you, which was, once again, kind of interesting to have a personal god in one of these cultures. And it's believed that some of these local mystery religions sort of devolved or evolved into the Eleusinian mysteries. And they're called Eleusinian because they actually deal with the location of Eleusis, the geographical area. And that means that only if you were from Eleusis could you worship in this cult. So, as the Greek Empire expanded, it didn't have to always be an Eleusinian who was worshiping in this cult. It could be some person who spoke Greek. And then eventually, anyone who was in the Greek Empire, after Alexander the Great, I believe, could worship as in the Eleusinian religion. What's really important of these Eleusinian mysteries is the hierarchy that they set up, this hierarchy of initiation. So there were the lesser mysteries, and that's just like your basic boy sort of stuff where you're part of the religion, you don't know much about it though. You might offer some sacrifices to a priest, or you might pay dues to the religion. And then the greater mysteries, or the advanced membership, was if you'd already been in for a while and you'd given a lot of money. And likewise, the epopteia was the epitome of religious association. And the adherent, even though he had given a lot of money, was probably also receiving a lot of the money by this point. He was probably one of the upper members of the organization. But it was costly, and I wouldn't say necessarily always corrupt, but it was there's a great chance that you were going to be out of a lot of goods by the end of it. So next were the Dionysiac mysteries, and this is actually one of the more controversial mystery religions. It involved the worship of the god Dionysius, who was believed to have rescued his mother from the underworld, and he gave humanity the grapevine. And you can see there he's often associated with drunkenness, which is one of the reasons that he was considered controversial. Thank you, Adrian. So like I said, this is a really controversial mystery because the rituals often involved public fornication, eating of raw animal corpses, and, like I mentioned earlier, drunkenness. So a lot of Greek leaders were very worried about people who were getting interested into this religion because they believed that it was a corrupting sort of thing, and they didn't like that people were running off and eating wild animals that they just like threw a rock at and then ate the corpse.
It'd actually rip it apart.
Yeah, rip it apart. It was It was pretty metal. So, so the belief of the raw animal meat was that if you ate the blood of a wild animal, you were sharing in the blood of Dionysus, because according to the religion, or the myth of the religion, Dionysus took the form of a wild animal. So it was actually relatively easy to be initiated into the cult. There's evidence of something kind of like infant baptism, or infant initiation at least, where a mother would perform some sort of ritual to get them permanently instated into the cult. Although not much is known about the initiation rites and how much it costs, like if there were membership dues or anything like that.
If they tried to eat, wild animals, what if they tried to eat, natural predators like lions or something like that?
I didn't specifically mention it. I think it was associated more with the boar and things like that. Because boar were not only wild, they were also often farm animals, sort of like, I guess, a balance sort of thing. But a lot of it was drinking too. They loved the alcohol. And then there are also Egyptian deities, which would be kind of strange for us to consider these mystery religions, but they were Greek corrupted versions of the Egyptian deities. They incorporated a lot of the ideas of the Eastern religions into their faith, but a lot of times it involved kind of just mixing the gods together. So in the text in Ferguson, the gods they typically chose were Osiris, Isis, and Serapis. But in the Greek sort of syncretism, these gods sort of were just merged with Aphrodite, Demeter. I couldn't remember who Serapis was merged with. Hey.
Often Zeus.
Zeus?
Yes.
But a big important part of this sort of association with religion was the story of Osiris's journey to become the king of the underworld. And the initiation into the cult was kind of similar to Eleusinian initiation in that there were tiers. You were like the lesser sort of main followers, and then you were as you progressed through the cult, you could get more and more positions of power. And you learn more rituals of the mystery religion as time went on. And the rituals often involved things like ceremonial cleansing or preparing a body to be met by Osiris. And that was the most interesting part of it, was that they believed that if you were mummified in a certain way, you were a reflection of Osiris, and that's how you got into a good spot in the underworld. And then there was, I combined these three together, the Phoenician, Phrygian, and Syrian deities, because these are kind of harder to understand, at least in the Greek context, because Greeks would shift the focus of these religions. So Greeks would sometimes put importance on the secondary gods of these religions instead of the gods that the original people actually believed in. And this makes it kind of difficult to know about how those religions originally operated, because each of the original religions had this strong focus on this mother deity. For the Phoenicians, it was Astarte. For the Phrygians, it was a god named Sibyl. And for the Syrians, it was a god named Etergasis. And at least with the Phoenicians, I know that the Greeks, instead of putting the focus on Astarte, actually put more of it on the male underling god Adonis. And I'm not sure exactly why they loved him so much, but he was kind of the one that took precedence in the Greek version of this religion. But these are also kind of the religions with the worst mysteries, or the worst ritual religious experiences, because Phoenician worship involved ritual prostitution, and the Phrygian and Syrian worship involved ritual castration, where
Why?
they believed it was becoming like the female goddess. It wasn't a great time, but
Feminism was a problem even back then.
Yeah, eunuch, becoming a eunuch for the, as kind of a priest
Yeah.
of the female goddess.
yeah, you also had to shave your head and eyebrows. It was less metal than the Dionysian one. Or more, yeah, I guess you could argue. But
Sounds like pop.
so the latter part of the text deals with the context in the Christian world. And I thought it was kind of strange because in the archaeological and historical world, there seems to be a tendency to conflate mystery religions with how the Christian religion developed. And they sort of want to make it seem as if these mystery religions, which often had an involvement where the relationship between the man and the deity was kind of personal, they thought, oh, Christianity must have been inspired by that. And some of these religions, like the Osiris one and I think the Dionysius one, had a theme, they thought, of resurrection. But if you actually look at the myths of those religions, the gods aren't resurrected. They remain in the underworld. They're just conscious in the underworld. And they prepare a place for their human followers in the underworld, which is not exactly what we see with a Christian religion, which is you are given a new body and you are given a new home. It's not like a waiting period for death.
That's an interesting topic. Somebody should do a presentation on it.
Okay,
Okay.
continue.
Yes, I will continue. And another thing is, none of the other religions are treated this way. So, for example, there's no automatic presumption that a Phoenician mystery religion must have inspired a local cult elsewhere that isn't associated with it. It's just, I think that Christianity's kind of given a bad hand where they want to presume that it's wrong for an ideological reason before they actually investigate the historical aspect of it. That's my presentation.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions or comments? We got one question here.
What's the unit?
A eunuch is someone who...
That's not necessarily true.
Yeah, a eunuch can be sort of like a manservant or an indentured servant, sort of. But a lot of times they were castrated.
Yeah, that's pretty much the definition. Okay.
Servant that's castrated?
They're usually a court person.
A person who has, yes, been neutered. How's that? A male who's been neutered is a eunuch. Okay, and they come up in, like we're saying here, Greek religion, usually as a priest. They're sometimes also as servants if the servants are used to sometimes be around a lot of women, like in the royal court, things like that. So this is a practice. Yeah.
There's a servant that was castrated, that's the definition.
Not always a servant. Yeah, could be a priest. I guess servant of a god or god, usually a goddess. Yes, and it's mentioned in the Bible, by the way. You can look it up, Matthew 19:12. I used to tell people to read and heed that verse, but perhaps you just need to read it first. Okay, Matthew 19:12. Now, I think we have, do you have your presentation ready? It should be there. Okay, let me go and see it. Then we'll get started on that. And then I think, sorry. Okay, all right. Let's talk about ancient Roman religion, shall we?
Good morning, class. I'm here to talk about ancient Roman religion. So here's the overview. So they believe that the early settlers of what would be Rome were a group of Latin people that are classified Indo-Europeans. These land settlers didn't really spent too much time into religion of their own culture. They're pretty, as the book described them, pretty simple, non-imaginative people. So I guess they just didn't concern about it. So they didn't really have anything, a lot of like myths or heroic tales or poetic backgrounds that we could look at or that we just haven't found any. And you can see the first starting to develop sorts of religion or myths when they were first contact with let's mess this word up. Etruscans.
Yeah.
They took over Rome for a while. And once they left, or the Romans kicked them out, the Romans kind of were like, hey, since we don't really have anything of our own, we might just take them and just modify what they believe in. Which you'll see is a very common thing among Romans with a lot of people they deal with. So some of the deities. Most early Roman deities had no real personalities. They're best described as by the word the book used was numen, or I forgot to put it here, genius. Either those two, and numen literally mean like a divine power or presence with no personality. That's the literal definition of the word, which I found funny. Most early Roman mythology was largely consumed and modified under the Greek mythology. So what you know now as Roman mythology is usually just Greek mythology with a little spice added to it.
Basically, they just copied off Greek mythology, but they just have different meanings.
Yeah, I was trying to make it seem a little nicer, but basically, yeah, they just copied the whole thing. um, you can see from the late 3rd century, Romans began taking Greek deities and modifying them to fit Roman standards. And not it wasn't that common, but I think it was the case of like 2 or 3 gods, which was like Zeus.
And by that you mean 3rd century BC.
Oh yes, forgot to put BC.
That's all right.
Like I know with Zeus and Jupiter, all they did was literally just change the name.
Yes.
And like with some others I can't remember, but most of them they had to like modify a lot of it, like between Athena and Ravana.
Ravi.
Minerva?
Yeah.
Minerva.
All these names. Athena and Minerva, they changed like completely. Like if you look at the Athena version, Greek version of Athena and the Roman version, they're like totally different. Like they take the whole war goddess aspect out of it. She becomes like the motherhood goddess, even though she is really weird. And then from that, the 3 main deities that they, I guess, worship or they thought were the most important was Jupiter, Juno, and
Minerva.
Minerva.
Yeah.
Minerva. So according to the book, there are 5 major colleges of priests: the pontiffs, the augurs, the board of 10, the haruspices, and the
It's okay.
fetials. It's like,
Close enough.
yeah. So this section was kind of confusing for me because they said there was these 5 major things,
Right.
but then when they went on to describe them, they didn't use the names they used before. So the way I took it was that as they came to describe what part was just different jobs within it, they don't really explain too much about this part at all.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
I was really confused. So, Flamen was an old word for priests. They were the priests that did, I guess, most of the major ceremonial works. And I was reading it.
And a lot of this would be sacrifices.
Yeah, sacrifice. Like whenever you need like a big sacrifice on like a state calendar holiday or something, these were your people to go to. He was like fully functional. That's pretty much, I guess, all they did. They considered them so holy that they couldn't really do anything else because they had to like adhere by these holy standards that they couldn't do anything that would mess it up. So I guess they just sat around and did sacrifices. Then the next level would be a pontifex, which was the more commonly used word for a priest. So I guess they equated it to like a lesser degree of a priest.
And that word means bridge,
Yeah.
right? Bridge between the gods and the humans.
They were priests who presided over certain ceremonies, but not professionally. They also had a college board college or board of 15 members called I'm not going to be able to pronounce that right.
Collegium Pontificum.
Collegium
Pontificum.
that I guess headed the principal cults within the area. I guess it would be like the Board of Education or something, residing over their religious cults. And their leader was known as the Pontifex Maximus,
Yes.
which was at first the oldest member, but then later on it changed to that they had to elect him. Then here we have the College of Augurs that really didn't participate in auspices. Oh shoot, auspices.
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 Yes.
Oh my. But we'll be asking for results. And auspice would just basically like if you use like it says there, like the entrails of animal or like the flight patterns of bird or like the waves.
Yeah, we would probably call it superstition.
Yeah, basically.
Because they would want to know the will of the gods. How do we know if the gods want me to go into battle? How do we know if the gods want me to do this or that? They would go to this specialized priest. They would cut open an animal. They would look at the entrails, often the livers, and then from that they would determine, and also other things like the flight of birds and
This
other
is like a
things.
modern day one, like you see a crow staring at your door in the morning, you're going
Well,
to
we do have like folk. We do have like we might call them
Folk, yeah.
folk tales, folk religion. For example, my mother always said, if you see an owl in the daytime, it means someone's going to die.
Ooh.
Someone close to you will die. other things like that, or, if you see this, it's sort of unusual thing, it was a signal of something else. That's
bad luck, right? The whole thing.
Yeah, sort of like, well, yeah, bad luck, especially for the guy dying, I guess, but it's, but yeah, I mean, it's that idea to sort of read the signs so that you can better, I guess, prepare for your day or for your life. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
No, take as much time you need. As I said, they usually weren't the people to do the act. It was usually the magistrates that did it.
Yes.
But they will come to them in case just to confirm the results or if they need anything else, like any more instructions dealing with it. Then we have the 6 Vestal Virgins. They were chosen out of a lot of 20 people chosen by the Pontifex Maximus. Basically, they were just like glorified firekeepers. Honestly,
Well, yeah, they were very important.
they were meant to keep the fire going.
Yes,
I guess forever.
because Vesta, has the flame.
Is like the
sort
goddess of the
eternal
hearth.
flame.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
And by the way, they are virgins. There were lots of laws, especially in Roman times. If anyone approached a Vestal virgin, they were considered to be sacrosanct, which means it was against the law to touch them. And if you did, you'd be put to death. If they found out a Vestal virgin was no longer a Vestal virgin,
how did they find out?
well, people have ways. And then that Vestal virgin would actually be buried alive.
Oh,
So not only would the guy be killed, but the priestess would
you
be
would've
buried alive in a tomb.
you thought they would have been burned alive? It was filled
No.
with the whole fire meaning.
No,
Anyways,
That's not what they did.
so they kept the fire burning, and I heard they had like a 30-year tenure or job.
did.
So that once you got picked, you were there for 30 years, no questions asked. And they all lived, I found this really cool, they all lived like in a little dorm house next to the temple of Vesta. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, that's right. They live communally.
So yeah, next we have religious observations,
Observances.
It was a common idea that deities needed food and drink sacrificed to them to keep them happy or sustain them. The book wasn't really clear on which one it was. It just said they just needed it.
Yeah.
So I assume they needed to sustain themselves or keep them happy or like to bring worship.
Well, one thing you want to remember about these gods, these Greco-Roman gods, is that they are not like the Judeo-Christian gods. They are basically like extremely powerful
Humans?
person. In other words, they have the foibles of humans. Although they are immortal, they get jealous, they need to eat, they need to drink, and so forth. And so they will get angry and do things, kind of like sometimes people do things, that doesn't make a lot of sense just because they're angry.
Okay.
Would it kind of be like with China and Japan with like the ancestors and everything like that? Like
Ancestor worship,
kind of like with China and Japan, like you go and have.
it's
have
there was a
sacrifices
sense there was a sense of venerating ancestors in Rome, definitely, and also in Greece. I don't know if it's exactly the same, but what I'm talking about is just the idea of the Greek and Roman gods of being sort of like very large, very powerful, immortal people. But they had all the foibles of humans. All right, go ahead. I don't know what you're doing.
I was
Let's get back to
demonstrating
this.
for you. Romans thought that sacrificing would increase their numen and in turn help people. So numen was like a spiritual force, I assume. The book was also not very clear about that either. They just said numen, they're like, yeah. So I assume it's like a spiritual force or it's good karma.
Well, by victims here, they're not doing human sacrifices. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Oh, no, yes, they're using
Animal
animals.
sacrifice.
When I read it in the book, they said use victims too. So at first, I went through the whole thing assuming it was humans, but no,
Yeah.
it later turned to be animals. I mean, the animals were victims, but
Well,
just to clarify, not human victims.
I just want to make sure we're not talking about human sacrifice at this point.
So the sacrifice it usually involved a procession of the victim animal to the altar. Then their prayer with the officiant with wine. They increase incense and other foods. They'll pour the wine on the animal's head. examine the entrails for omens, then bring part of the sacrifice on the altar, and finally had a banquet celebrating the
Yeah, so like a giant barbecue.
Honestly, it was not. It doesn't sound that bad. And then Rome had both domestic and state calendar observances. Calendar ceremonies were performed by the state, and all the citizens had to do was just abstain from the acts that were not permitted during that time. And they used the word describe this as dies nefasti.
Yes, the sort of the spirit of the gods.
Yeah, basically, they're like this day belongs to the gods.
Yes.
And then dies fasti was like days belong to men's civil work.
Yes.
And finally, we have the connect, and this is like the connect. This is all talking about the connection to the state and religion. It could be seen strongest in the Palmarium,
Miriam.
which is like the sacred boundary of Rome. According to the book, only certain authorized priests, cults, and ceremonies could be held there. Like the state had a complete control over that part.
Okay.
And here we come to the part about soul and dead. The dead belong to the mains, yeah, which is like I guess a polite way of addressing all the dead people
Okay.
that are dead.
Yeah.
The book also want to clarify that the Romans before is like more not like they view as individual dead person, but once they start incorporating a lot of more Greek ideas into their myths and religion, they start viewing the death journey as an individual thing instead of just like a group. And then they went on to talk about the genius, which is like a numen or like principle for families, especially for the head of the family, especially for the male head of family. This was like a really important. They were like worship it. There was a cult for it and everything.
Well, you know what? One of the things you need to remember, of course, it's very patriarchal.
Yeah.
But they have this idea that we've mentioned here before, the pater familias, the father of the family. But you're getting that from, yeah, there you go. They're getting that from the gods as well.
Yeah.
You know, the gods have that set up, and we should have that set up in our family. Okay.
Yeah. If just one gripe about this book, they still don't really explain what numen is. But
Well, it's kind of like spirit.
yeah.
It's like it's from the idea of life principle, spirit. It's what makes a body alive. You know, it's not, you've got a physical body, but this is sort of the spiritual side of that.
Okay. Cool. So, like I said,
It's your personality, but it's also your spirit.
that's cool. Nah, that makes sense. The genus is like he says, life force, but for females, they use Juno. The book said, not like the goddess.
Yes, it's particularly connected with women, with marriage, with childbearing, Juno, and that's why, for example, many people, even still today, want to get married in June because June is named for Juno, and Juno is the woman, you know, like the female force of the gods, and will bless the marriage and be very fruitful and productive if you get married in June. So even today, a lot of people say, you know, a June wedding is sort of like the ultimate time to get married. But they don't know why, but that's why.
Oh wow. Okay, so like what I was saying before, they revered the genus of the family head a lot. Like that was, if there was anything that was like revered, it would be the head of the house genius. There was cults to this, but to the part of familia, but that didn't really start until Augustus died, I guess, and they started worshiping his genius. And it became like a state religion and a state cult and everything.
Yeah, they worship Augustus as the sort of the father of Rome.
Yeah, so that
Yes.
there was like a whole cult dedicated to his genius.
Emperor worship becomes then.
Yeah. So the books later said the genius is depicted either as an older man in the toga, if you're talking about the genius of the state, and then or a young semi-nude person, they didn't specify, carrying a cornucopia.
Cornucopia. You know what that is? It's a horn of plenty. It's like a.
Oh, is that little horn with the
and
fruit?
it has like all the fruit usually coming out of it.
That's what it's
You usually
called.
see it like Thanksgiving or in the
I
fall.
thought it was just called a fruit basket.
Yeah.
and Patera.
It's a symbol of abundance.
Yes. And then we have religion, the religion held Roman times general. I just had like a whole bunch of information.
Yeah.
Like it was a lot. So I just picked like the 5
That's fine.
like ones that I thought were the major ones. So we have Greco-Roman paganism was non-exclusive. I think we all could guess that. They weren't really into that our religion is the right religion, the only religion. They were like, hey, you have your religion, it might exist while we have ours, same place. The identification of similar deities from different places reduce the number of deities that are worship. That goes with the Romans had a lot of deities, so I guess a way they thought, hey, we could like cut the amount they are is by saying like, hey, Jupiter is Zeus, Juno is Hera. Like all these gods are connected somehow, and for a lot of reasons, a lot of the smaller deities, if they were kind of similar, they'll just kind of say like, hey, they're kind of like the same person, just in a different religion. Cut that out. They tend to personify virtues or benefits. And Adrian was laughing when I think Lane said the whole, what was it? I think it was like virtue or something like that.
Okay.
But like they did a lot of it like for some of the lesser deities. One was Solace, which came from like salvation, or like Victoria, which victory. And they tend to do that a lot of their lesser known deities.
They did personify, for example, good fortune, fortuna,
Yeah.
it means good luck. So a lot of things that we might call, or even personify the river of the Tiber and so forth. This is to sort of make them more accessible and worshipable, I guess, if that's the word.
And that character was that the power of fate and magic was really strong within Rome, and that religious practices were considered a public social aspect of life instead of private. That's that.
All right. Any questions? All right. Well, I think we're just about out of time, so I guess we ended just right. Let me